All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jay Nichol. And as always, I try and be as transparent and as authentic as possible, and I'll just get it out there. I have been struggling for the last, I don't know, what day's today? Thursday. Got home Sunday. Last 5 days, anyways, with how to approach this podcast, whether even to do this podcast, what to share, what not to share in this podcast. I'm going to go over in detail my Wyoming elk hunt, and I'm also going to touch on the few days of moose and elk hunting I did in BC before I left. And I'm going to do my best to tell the story as coherently as possible. It's pretty ridiculous. Stay tuned. You're definitely going to want to take a seat for this one. And I'm going to do my best to just tell the story as unbiased and coherently as possible. And then I've made some notes about my takeaways because I think the reason I want to share this hunting story is so that people don't wind up in a similar situation to the one I found myself in. Because I do think it was avoidable had I made better decisions. Ultimately, the results of my hunts the responsibility for them always reside with me and my decision. So before we get into the heavy and somewhat depressing podcast, I have two pieces of fantastic news that I do want to share. Number one, Mindful Hunter Outfitting is live. So currently I am offering archery mule deer hunts in Alberta and any weapon spring black bear hunts in British Columbia. I will put the link to the video and the podcast that I did about this with lots more details, but there's a bunch of different options, hotel show for the deer hunt. You could do backcountry or base camp for the bear hunt. Really good learning opportunity if somebody wants to go spend some time in the backcountry. Also, great opportunity for some really world-class animals on both hunts. It's a coastal region of British Columbia where the bears are. So 20-inch skulls and 7-foot bears are definitely not unheard of. And there was a 193-inch mule deer taken in my area last year by one of Lander's clients, the outfitter who sold me the area. So if you have any questions about those hunts, you want to book a hunt, let me know, jay@mindfulhunter.com. Second piece of news, I am giving away a Prime RVX 34. So I have not officially kind of launched this giveaway yet, but I want to give the podcast listeners a bit of a leg up. I think the actual giveaway is going to launch on Monday. This is the bow that I've been shooting since January, taking it on a few hunts, and killed my giant coastal black bear with it at 15 yards. Like I mentioned, the full giveaway and all the details will be posted sometime early next week. But essentially, if you join Mindful Reviews between now and December 15th, you will be entered to win this bow. So all members of Mindful Reviews, regardless of the type of membership that they currently have, will be entered to win the bow. And you need to be a member at the drawing date. And so when I have more information and I got it fully posted, I'll add some links and make an Instagram post and all the rest of it. But if you want to get a jump on it, go over, join Mindful Reviews. As long as you're still a member, as of December 15th, you are automatically entered to win the bow. And I'm actually just about to leave to guide moose for 18 days, but when I get back, I will be posting the review of that bow. Briefly, I've been very happy with the bow. The bow shoots lights out. It's a great bow. There are, I always have some criticisms, but overall, it's a bow I would recommend owning. So there we go. That's all we've got for house cleaning. If you want more information on outfitted hunts, jay@mindfulhunter.com. And if you want to enter to win the bow, just got to sign up at Mindful Reviews and you'll be automatically entered. And as soon as I finish the rest of the collateral for that giveaway, I will post it and let you all know. Okay, let's dive into the hunt. So about 2 years ago, a guy reached out, a listener of the podcast, and he said, "Hey, I'm a Wyoming resident. If you ever draw an elk tag in Wyoming and you want to go into the wilderness, let me know." So for those of you who don't know, there are federally designated areas in the United States of wilderness. So like capital W wilderness. And each state kind of chooses differently how to manage those wilderness areas as far as access goes. A unique thing about Wyoming is that you cannot go into these designated wilderness areas as a non-resident without being accompanied by a resident. So some people, after they draw their tag, will hire an outfitter so that they can go into these kind of more remote regions. But just like British Columbia, you can also have a resident host you. So they get your hunter number, they fill out some paperwork, and as long as you're with them when you're hunting, you can go into these wilderness areas. And they tend to be pretty remote, like you go in on horseback or take some llamas or doing some stuff like that. There's still a ton of Wyoming that you can hunt that I would consider small W wilderness. That's great hunting territory, but in order to go to these specific areas, you have to have resident accompaniment of some kind. So this guy reached out, seemed like a good guy, seemed like a great opportunity. So he chatted online, kind of back and forth for a little while. And then coming into this year, I had 6 points. And that was kind of what you needed to draw a regular elk tag. In Wyoming, they have regular and special. The only real difference is that you got to pay twice as much for the special as you pay for the regular. And because it costs more, you have better odds because fewer people are willing to pay that elevated cost. But they jacked the price of the special up this year. So the kind of strategy most people had was it was going to drive more people down into the regular. And even though it was on track to only need 5 points, you were probably actually going to need 6 because of the increased pressure on those regular tags. And that's exactly what happened. You needed 6 points this year to draw a regular tag. So 6 years I've been building points in Wyoming. I burnt my points. I got my general elk tag, checked back in with Buddy, maybe sometime around March. I forget when the Wyoming results come out. They used to come out earlier, and it might be March or May or something like that. Checked back in with them. Hey, drew my tag. We still good to go? He's like, yeah. He'd gotten rid of the llamas by now and instead had gotten one horse and said, what we can do is rent a couple mules. So I was like, okay, sounds like a good idea. So we texted back and forth kind of throughout the rest of the year and kind of went over game plans and dates and all that kind of stuff. And there was a little bit of like back and forth. He was apparently supposed to be doing some guiding and then decided not to. So it changed the dates we were going in. But eventually we decided on, I think we were going to try and go in on the 8th and come out the 18th, give or take a day. That was the general plan. So I did a little bit of moose and elk hunting in BC for the first week of September. And then just before I drove down, my buddy Vance's was actually on the way in Alberta. So I stopped in and did an evening and a morning hunt with him before heading on down to Wyoming. And I have some thoughts on those hunts as well, but I'm going to save that for the kind of wrap up part of this podcast. So I drive all the way down to Wyoming, got there. It was like fairly early in the day, like noon or 1. Met this guy at his place. Seemed to go pretty well. We went over our gear. Packing up for horseback is a little bit tedious. You got to make sure panniers weigh exactly the same, and you can't have your backpacks loaded. And it's kind of what we decided to do was wear our empty backpacks with our bows strapped to our packs. So there's a bit of setup to be done, and the fact that we were riding horses there was some added complications. Also, I wanted to be able to ride the horse for a little bit first. So we're trying to get everything packed up so that we could get over to where he kept his horse and ride it for a little bit that evening. So we get everything squared away. And in the morning, we had to go pick up the mules and the horses because he had also decided he just bought his daughter a young 3-year-old horse. And I don't know, I've heard the words gelding and bay, and it was part Mustang. It was like a young, untrained, unrideable horse. But he wanted to bring it with us in order to help train it up for future pack trips, which seemed like, a reasonable decision to make to me. So we get up in the morning, do a little bit, pack up the trucks, everything's good to go. We run over, we pick up the horses, we run over, we pick up the mules. We're missing a couple pieces of tack. So we went to Tractor Supply, got those last few pieces, got to the trailhead around 10:30 and had all the horses unloaded, packed up, ready to go and heading in the trail by like 12:30. The goal was to ride about 18 miles. Or at least that's what it looked like on the map. And theoretically, that should have been like a reasonable prospect. Like that's a good solid day of riding, somewhere between 8 and 11 hours, depending on how efficient your horses are and how bad the trail is. So, it was going to be a long day, but it was a doable day. So we start heading down the trail. First mile goes great. Some of my spidey senses had started tingling before this. I'm trying to remember exactly when I first started having a couple doubts. But even as we were like loading up the horses, I've been around horses before. I've elk hunted on horseback before, and just there was like a lack of confidence or something. It was just the way he was treating the horses and the way we were tying things up. I'm like, this seems a little, unorganized, disorganized. I don't know. I do remember thinking to myself, this feels a little bit off, but whatever, all good. Seems like a good guy. I'm sure we'll be fine. Start heading down the trail. First mile's great. Second mile, everything starts to fall apart. So this young horse, it starts just causing major drama. Like, basically, the way the pack string works is you have horses tied off to the other horses, and he's got them tied. I forget using what. Essentially, he's using a rope with a certain break strength so that if they fall or the string goes over the edge or something, the horses can break apart to increase or decrease the likelihood of an injury occurring. Also, there's these metal clasps that he's used that have a certain pop strength, or like if you pull on them hard enough, much harder than a human being could, but like if two horses yank against each other hard enough, these metal clips will unclick and let the horses free, because that's safer than like having them, tied together where they can't get free. But basically this horse starts to realize if it just rears back and jerks his head as hard as possible, it can either rip the rope or break the clasp. So within about, I don't even know, a quarter of a mile, this thing had broken its lead probably 6 times. And then it decided it didn't really want to walk at all. So we essentially, it takes us 6 hours to go just a little over 3 miles. Like we were going at a snail's pace, constantly on and off horses, constantly dragging this young horse. Like it was turning into a nightmare fast. And so I said to him, listen, man, why don't we call the day a loss? Let's take this young horse back to the trailhead. We'll drive back to town tonight. We'll drop the young horse off back at the barn. He had a trailer at the trailhead. We'll drive back to your trailer tonight. Be midnight or 2 o'clock by the time we get back. Who cares? We'll sleep in the trailer and we'll come back in with the horse and the 2 mules tomorrow. Because the young horse wasn't carrying anything anyways. It was just a training expedition for it. And he was adamant that no, we were taking this horse in. So I'm like, okay, it's your horses, your trip. I will defer to your judgment. So we basically had a nightmare for the next 8 hours. We finally make it. So there's a big pass that you got to get over that's 10 miles from the trailhead. And where we were going was about another 8 miles past that. It was almost midnight by the time we made it over the pass. And it was a nightmare trying to get these horses and mules to get over the pass. But we get over the pass, we find a flat spot of grass. I'm starting to feel, my confidence is shook. I'm like, this is not looking good. But we're in it. We're like, okay, we can hunt in the morning. We'll hunt here in the morning and then maybe move camp in the afternoon. Spirits start to lift a little bit once we get on the other side of that pass. Plus the trail had been pretty crazy and it mellowed out a little bit once we got over. So we get to this new section. We start rolling out camp. We decided we're not even going to put up the teepee. We're literally just going to roll out bedrolls, sleeping pads, and sleep under the stars. It's not going to rain. That way we can pack up quick in the morning. So I'm like, great, sounds good. He takes care of the horses. I go to set up my camp, my little bedroll. I finish inflating my pad and I look up and I don't see any mules. And I'm like, hey man, where are the mules? And he's like, oh, they're right over there. I'm like, no, they're not. I'm like, where are they? And he had apparently tied one up to this kind of small brush, like a branch of a small tree, like a young pine or something, and let the other one off to feed. And apparently tied up the younger, smaller horse. I don't remember any of that. But when I looked up, the only horse I could see was his older, more well-trained horse. And what happened was all of the horses and mules, except for that one, had escaped. Basically, I think the one that wasn't tied up started to wander, and then this other mule would get very socially anxious when it got separated from its like partner mule. And I think he just broke whatever he was on and ran after it. So we ran back up the trail, maybe a half a mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile, saw no sign of them. It's fairly common occurrence that when horses get off, they will go back up the trail you came in. So it's like you don't really worry about them too much. This was a heavily grizzly infested area, but the sentiment was they probably just ran back to the trailhead. But basically, now we're screwed. We have one horse. We have 3 horses, or a horse and 2 mules worth of gear, like panniers, top hats, like all this stuff is packed to go on horses, not on horseback. And in this wilderness, I'm not allowed to hunt solo. So I'm literally going to bed like we're screwed. I'm not going to be able to hunt tomorrow. We should have just taken the young horse back. I'm like, all these like thoughts are running through my head. Pretty brutal night's sleep. But he had texted a buddy of his who's an outfitter in the area who had a corral at the trailhead where he kind of keeps all his stock. He has lots of camps in there and he's constantly running pack strings in and out. And he texted him that night saying, hey, this is what happens. We're hoping you see 2 mules and a horse at the trailhead. So unbelievably enough, we wake up in the morning to a text from this guy saying, hey, we got your 2 mules, no sign of the horse. We're going to send your 2 mules in on our pack string. So I'm like, that's fantastic. I'm like, okay, we finally caught a break. There's enough area where we are. We can hunt this area that we are in on foot for the day. And then when the horses get back, when the mules get in, we can make a decision about what to do. So we go off and we hunt all day. And this is when, this guy had told me he'd killed 21 bulls, which already seemed a little bit dubious. He said he'd killed 21 bulls since 2013. I'm like, man, 21 bulls in 11 years is pretty crazy. Like, that's 2 bulls every single year. I'm not going to say that's impossible, but I don't personally know anyone that's like an actual friend. I'm sure there's like famous people I know of that have done it, but not anybody, none of my acquaintances have killed 21 bulls in 11 years. And then when we start elk hunting, and I don't want to get very derogatory and I don't want to say a bunch of negative things, but I did not have very much confidence. He was doing weird things that didn't make a lot of sense to me. And listen, there are better elk hunters in the world than me for sure, but I've also spent a fair amount of time elk hunting. I've killed 3 bulls with my bow. I've killed 2 of those solo. I would consider myself like I can hold my own as an intermediate elk hunter, and I understand the basic concepts. And I would say I'm a moderately above average caller. And just the stuff he was doing was weird. And we were starting to see that our personalities didn't really jive. Like it was just an oil and vinegar type of thing. He wasn't in great shape. I kind of like to hunt hard. I like to hike a lot. I like to, take the shorter, harder routes. And it was just like, yeah, there was a bit of friction, but we were working through it. It's a first day hunting together. It wasn't like the end of the world, but in hindsight, this is where I start to saw the signs of kind of things falling apart. And then we do this big long walk, and at the very end of the day at like 5:00, he actually spots a bull in a little basin where he'd seen it last year. And it's a nice bull, real nice 6x6, probably like 290. I would have shot it in a heartbeat, would have been my biggest bull by a long stretch. And we go to make a play on this bull, and this is when I really started to be like, what is going on, man? So we hike all the way around this basin and we drop in, and the setup is perfect. Wind is in our face. At that time, we'd only seen 2 bulls. It turned out there was 5 elk altogether, but we didn't find that out until much later. And I've got a pin exactly where the bull was last. And he starts like going incredibly slow, like over 500 yards away from this bull. And in my head, I'm like, what are we doing right now? Why are we crawling 500 yards from a bull with the wind in our face? And I don't want to say it's the wrong decision, but I've always been a little more aggressive with elk. Like I want to get in there. I know where he is. So my approach would have been to stay completely silent, get to within 100, 150 yards of his last known location, do some cow calls, maybe a location bugle, try to pin down his location, and then sneak into 50 or 75 and start hitting him with like a pretty aggressive calling sequence if I hadn't seen him and got a shot by then. That with the wind in my face, the elevation in my favor, all that kind of stuff. That's what I would have done. The thermals had switched. The wind was coming down. The bull was above us. A bull would prefer to come down on you than come up to you. Like everything was in our favor. And he stops 500 yards away and starts doing these cow calling sequences. And we literally sat there for 45 minutes. And I'm trying to show some respect. It's your area. It's your hunt. Okay. And then we make eye contact. We decide to creep a little bit closer. We creep a little bit closer. And then maybe about 200 yards from where we saw the bull last, we continue another calling sequence. Now he's starting to do some bugles and stuff. Still, yeah. Anyways, after the whole sequence, probably we spent an hour and a half to 2 hours on, and now it's like 7:45, I want to say, and it's starting to get dark. So he makes eye contact with me and he says, let's pull out. Clearly they're not coming. And I'm like kind of disappointed, but it's the first day of hunting, like so be it. A little frustrated because I would have liked to have ran that play a little bit differently, but that's part of hunting with people. You need to kind of let other people take the lead sometimes. We turn around and start walking out, and then we get maybe 100 yards from where we're calling. We turn around and look up the hill, and we just see elk coming down the hill. And we're like, oh my God, they're finally coming. They hadn't returned any of our calls, nothing, but now they're working their way down the call. How much that, or down the hill, how much that had to do with what we were doing, I don't know. And he's like, well, maybe better next time. And I'm like, screw this, man. I'm running in there. So he hides in the bush. I run back in. I do my best to kind of get this bull to come out. I am in pretty close proximity to one of the bulls. I end up bugling. Another one of the bulls bugles back at me. Basically, there was one, mature herd bull, two cows, and then two dink bulls, which I did not want to shoot. And it was one of the dink bulls that bugled back at me. But it turned out I kind of got to within 80 yards of this herd bull, but by then it was so dark I couldn't see him. He couldn't see me. We end up pulling out for the day. We get back to camp around, I don't even know, 10 o'clock at night. And I think we'd walked something like, 15 miles, 20, 24, 25 kilometers for the day, like big day. And we were able to find the mules. Our original horse was still tied up. So now we're back at camp. We got two mules and a horse, but it's late. And there's a little bit of tension in camp, but nothing we can't work through. But we decide, okay, let's have a little bit of a sleep in tomorrow and let's spend the day moving tomorrow so that we can just get to where we want to be. Because the other thing that we had discovered, we didn't find that out until the next morning. We saw another camp the next morning. So we still thought we were the only people in that area that night. But we had seen zero fresh sign. Other than that one herd bull, we had seen no bulls. We'd seen a group of cows earlier in the day. But it was, the one thing I know about elk hunting is you just cover ground until you hit fresh sign or you hear calling. And we had seen neither. So it was time to move. And it was going to be a 4 to 6 hour move. So we were going back and forth between, do we do a morning hunt and then move? And I could see that, he'd been pushed pretty hard. So I was like, okay, whatever. We'll sleep in the morning, not a big sleep in, till like 7 o'clock. And then we'll do our move and we'll try and save an evening hunt out of the day tomorrow. So that's what we do. We load up the next morning and we go. And again, it's this like painstaking process of moving the horse and mules. Because by now, the mules have gone 30 miles in 2 days. They came in 10 during the day, out 10 at night, and in 10 the next day. And we're tying them up so tight now, like with a short lead, that they can eat a little bit at night, but it's not like they're hobbled and can graze all night, or like they're definitely being asked more of them than they should. So the next day, a move that should have taken us 3 to 4 hours takes 6 to 7 hours, because every 3 to 4 steps this mule that he's riding is like stopping to eat. And yeah, he got a little bit frustrated with me because I was getting frustrated, but I was kind of like, dude, this is insane. Like, can we just take them off and walk them? Like, I would just rather do whatever it's going to take to cover distance. And the weird part about it was, it happened another time, and I was the one who said to him, this horse seems to be much more directable. Like, if I tell the horse to just walk and not eat, it just walks and not eat. And you seem to be unable to do the same thing with your mule. And I said to him, can I take the lead? And maybe the mule will just follow the horse. And as soon as I took the lead, that's exactly what happened. And I remember thinking to myself, like, how am I the guy coming up with the ideas about how to run the horses when I have next to no horse experience in this guy? And I found out, other than a little bit of experience when he was younger, he'd only been messing around with horses for the last 8 months. He took like a horse boot camp thing, but he was not incredibly experienced with running multiple pieces of stock in the backcountry. Like, I know guys that have wrangled for a living, and it takes like a few seasons to like really become proficient at this stuff. So anyways, we grind it out for 6 or 7 hours. We get to the new location and we set up camp, and we go out for an evening hunt. And this was when I started to question the actual validity of the things he'd been telling me. Like, up until now, it was more like, we're just mildly not getting along, and I don't really hunt elk the way he hunts elk. And both of those things are fine. I get it. People are people. But now we're at the point where, like, he's telling me where things are, but then I'm asking him how we get there, and he doesn't really know. And he's like, oh, there should be a horse trail over there. And then I'm like, oh, can we do that tomorrow morning? He's like, well, I don't really know where it is in the dark. And it was like, one of these guys, like the more he talks, the more the stuff that he had told me, like it started to fall apart and I started to lose my confidence. I'm like, I don't think this guy actually knows what's going on back here. And so we hunt for that night. Don't really see too much. I think I glassed up one bull. Yeah. And we got a couple bugles. That's right. A couple faint bugles and saw one cow, but no real close encounters, but started to find some really good sign. But in elk hunting, you need like a couple day old sign, and the stuff we found was like a couple weeks old. They tend to kind of move up the hill as the hunting season progresses. They move up in elevation as the rut gets later. They move up to these benchy areas, and they'd been down in the flats, obviously, throughout summer and the early part of September. And so the next day, he kept saying we should take a horse trail to the top. And I was like, yeah, whatever horse trail you want. But then he was like, I don't know where any of them are. But he said he'd been on them multiple times before. So I just didn't understand. I was very confused. And so I was the one who said, I'm looking up at this hill behind camp. There was a horse trail that looked like it left behind camp that went up that hill. I'm like, well, let's just get on that trail and start covering ground. We'll just walk until we find some elk. There's tons of country back here. And he's like, yeah, okay, let's do it. So we start following the horse trail. Everything's going great for the first hour of the day, but then it turns out the horse trail just kind of goes up on the hill a little bit and then back down into the flats. It was like a kind of a back route to the main trail. And I wanted to go all the way up the hill. It was about, 1,600 feet from the bottom of this hill up to the top. And it was a huge, like 10-mile long hill with a nice flat face to it, lots of benches, like great, just awesome country. And so when the trail's done, I'm like, well, let's just walk straight up this hill. And he kind of starts like, what are you talking about? We don't do that here. We walk cross contour. And I'm like, well, I don't know what else to do. You can't seem to take us to a horse trail that takes us up to the top. The elk are not down below. The only thing I know how to do is get more ground and cover more area. So I finally just like, we're going up the hill. So we go up the hill. He follows me. It's like dragging the horses. Like the guy's not in the best shape. So it takes us a lot longer to get up that hill than I would like. But we get up the hill. We're still in fairly decent spirits. And then we hit this elevation band from like 9,400 to 9,800 feet. That is just like Elkamageddon. And so now we're excited. This is the sign we've been looking for. Like fresh rubs, strips of bark laying on the ground, wet trees from rubs, green slimy elk poop, like just fresh wallows, like you can smell elk. It's like, oh yeah. So we hunt through that all morning, make our way around the back of this hill, up to the top of the hill. We get up to the top of the hill, still haven't seen her or called in any elk. And now it's like noon and he lays down for a nap. And I'm like, okay, that's an elk hunt. That's a reasonable thing to do. So he lays down for a nap. I lay down for like half an hour, but I'm starting to get anxious. I've got this like kind of sense of anxiety about the whole thing and I can't. So I'm like, I'm going to go cover some ground. So I finish walking this ridge kind of up to the top, do a bunch of glassing. And then I start to make a game plan in my head because I see this big finger ridge that'll take us down in this other area. And so I put together this whole game plan. So I go back, I let him sleep for 2 hours. So I wake him up at 2:00. He's in a good mood. I'm in a good mood. He didn't have any water. That's the other thing. Like, I don't know. I guess some people need more water than others. A liter a day while I'm out, as long as I can drink lots when I get back to camp and some in the morning is like more than enough for me. Not enough for that guy. Anyways, so I tell him the game plan. He's like, yep, sounds great. We hike up the rest of this ridge. The goal was to get to this end of this ridge and just kind of have another break until we started hitting like the evening rush, like maybe 4:30, 5:00, and then slowly pick our way back to camp on a diagonal down this hill, hoping to scare up some elk on these kind of meadowy fingers that were going in the direction we wanted to go. And then we got to the end of this ridge. It's like 2:30, 2:45 at this point, and we just hear this like weak bedded bugle. And both of us look at each other. That's the other thing. I got to be honest about this. the whole time so far in this hunt, this guy, every 20 minutes, would be like, oh, there's a bugle. I'm like, dude, there was no bugle. He's like, oh, I heard some cow calls. And it's just like, can you just stop with the constantly hearing bugles and cow calls? Like, I'm not deaf. It was just a very I've never been with somebody who like kept claiming to hear things that clearly weren't there. Anyways, we both heard this bugle. So now we're like fired up. This is like one of the first bugles in proximity that we can play. So we start making a game plan. And basically I location bugle and he will respond to me. And I do this maybe 3 times over 20 minutes, kind of working closer each time to the point where I have him pretty well located and he's maybe, let's say 300 yards down this hill in front of us. And I've taken points on him. Like I've echolocated him from a few different locations. So I'm very confident he's down this hill, kind of right over this ridge. And then we kind of have a little bit of a disagreement how to play it. And I was pretty firm. Like, listen, man, it's 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Thermals are strong. They're coming up the hill. The way we do this is we dive off this hill. We close the distance. We know where that last pin is. We get to sub 100 yards, and then we try and call this bastard in. And so he agrees to do that. So we dive down the hill, and we essentially execute a decent calling sequence. He's maybe 50, 75 yards up the hill from me. And we're not able to get the bull to break free. I think the closest the bull ever was to me was probably 75 or 100 yards away. But I was never able to lay eyes on the bull. And then finally the bull just goes quiet. After calling for another 10, 15 minutes, I start working forward and can't see him. And so we work forward another 150 yards and realize he's walked off with his cows. So we have a seat, and I'd videoed some of the encounter on my phone. And so I had to play it back on the phone. And before I can put the phone on silent or turn it down, me bugling on the phone gets played. And literally like 150 yards away, this bull can hear the phone and he bugles back. And I go to him, I'm like, let's go. It's so funny. I had just heard a podcast with Trail from Go Hunt. And he said one of the mistakes elk hunters make most often is giving up too early when they're dogging the herd. And that you just need to keep pressing and pressing and pressing. And because it's so hard to constantly keep those cows rounded up and moving, you will eventually catch up with the herd. And so when I heard that bugle, I'm like, let's go. And he's like, no, we want to let them bed and then get comfortable. We'll take half an hour and then we'll go back after them. And again, it's one of those things where there's a difference of opinion, but it's 2 different people. And he'd agree with me to go for the first half of the play. So I was like, okay, we'll do what you want to do. Sit there for a half an hour and bugle, nothing. Cow call, nothing. Sit there for another 20 minutes, calling, nothing. So we're like, okay, we lost that bull. Let's go back to the original game plan and start working our way cross contour back down this hill, kind of towards camp. It's like maybe 4:30 now, 4 o'clock. And so we do that. We walk for about an hour. We cover maybe, 700-800 yards. It's pretty hilly and lots of drainages and stuff that we're following the contours on. So it's not incredibly efficient ground. And we're kind of being quiet as we go. And then we get to the point that's kind of right above where we'd seen a cow the day before and where we'd heard a bugle the night before. So we're like, I think it was only 5 o'clock and we were getting, within a mile and a half of camp. So it's like, let's hold up here for an hour. Let the evening really set in and then kind of bugle our way through this area, hoping to stir something up. So we sit down for a bit of a break. I lay down on my pack, just chill out when it's maybe 45 minutes. He's like, okay, let's go. I'm like, okay. I stand up, I do a location bugle, and from directly behind us, my guess would be 400 or 500 yards, immediately a bull torches off. And I don't think it's unreasonable to assume it was the same bull. I think we chased the bull. He went over there. I think he bedded with his cows and he just stayed silent during that first calling sequence after the break. And then he had started to come back the way he was going originally with his cows, working the way down. I think they go down to the bottom of the river, drink and feed at night, and then come back up to their bedding in the morning and hang out at that 9,400 to 9,800 elevation in the day, and then rinse and repeat. And so we're like, oh, wow. And then we had a bit of a discussion about which way to play it, and he did have the right idea. I kind of wanted to cut back cross contour, but the thermals had started to switch, and there was a much greater likelihood that I was going to get blown out if we followed my plan. He's like, let's dive down, cross the drainage, and play him from the bottom. So that's what we do. Bugling with him every 10, 15 minutes maybe, just to like nail down his location and make sure he was still engaged. And he's ripping back every time. Now, he won't do it 2 or 3 times in a row, but if you wait 5 or 6 minutes, rip a location bugle, you'll get one response and maybe a second response if you throw back some chuckles or something. So we get into a spot with like a little decent setup. He's maybe 300 yards above us, something like that. He does not seem to want to come down the hill. I felt like he held up in the same location for maybe 20 minutes. And then all hell broke loose. This like hailstorm of biblical proportions just rips loose from the heavens, and it just starts pissing rain and hail, and it's sideways, and it's going on and on and on. And it's maybe 6:45 at this point. Like we got maybe another hour left of playable daylight. And finally at some point, like I couldn't hear a bull bugle up the hill if you paid me. Like it was that aggressive, like, you know, hurricane level winds, really intense. So we decide, all right, let's pull out. We'll go back to camp for the night, start walking down the hill. Maybe after 20, 25 minutes, it kind of clears up. So maybe we should have stuck around. I don't know. It was hard to say because the bull wasn't really moving anyways. I'm sure there's lots of different decisions we could make in hindsight. So then the whole way back to camp, we're trying to decide what to do the next day. And I'm trying to be as open as possible. I'm like, whatever you want to do, man. I'd like to go play those same bulls. I'm like, we could just walk up the hill in the morning and try and find him again the same way we did. And he's a fan of taking the horse trail because we did find the horse trail on the ridge, but we don't know where it connected with the one down below. He said he'd been on it before multiple times, but apparently he didn't know where it was. And he'd lost some tracks on his onyx. So I was like, oh, okay. So he didn't want to go look for it in the dark, but he didn't want to walk up the hill. And so this is where I was like starting to like kind of lose my patience a little bit. Cause I'm like, well, you don't want to walk up the hill. You say we can't go find the horse trail. I'm like, what do you want to do? And then I would ask him and he would just talk for 45 minutes and he would finish talking and be like, okay, so what do you want to do? And he would just keep talking circles and circles and circles. And I'm like, I'm losing my mind. And at this point, like, listen, I know because I have a podcast and I talk a lot on here, you would think that I'm like a chatty guy. I am not. I suck at small talk. I don't even know what to say to people at Starbucks when I go through the drive-thru. It's like literally so awkward. They try and spark up these conversations and I'm just like a wet blanket. Like it's not my forte. If you want to have a deep conversation about, you know, the meaning of life and, you know, trauma and like, you know, the things you've gone through as a child, like those conversations I like having. I like deep connections with a few people. I don't like shallow connections with many people. And I'm not going to hold it against this guy, but this guy he's a talker, just talk constantly. Like, but from the moment we got up to the moment we went to bed, he talked. I'm not going to say that's a bad thing. I think that would work really well for some people. It's just not the kind of thing that I just can't handle that constantly in the backcountry. Like, I like it quiet back there. And the other thing is I like to speak quietly. Like I normally talk like this. Like if we're in the elk woods and we're talking about stuff, I'm going to come over to you and even if I can't see any elk, we're going to talk like this to each other. And his thing, he would just like, it was very, you know, loud. And again, I don't want to paint him in too negative of a light. I think this guy is a nice guy. I think he was well-intentioned. I think he's a good dad. I think he's a good husband from what I saw. He's hardworking. He's generous. Like he's a good person. But sometimes you just don't get along with people. And that's what was starting to come out. It's like, we're just oil and vinegar, man. Like we are just not a match. And I'm trying so hard to just get a game plan out of him for the next day. And he eventually just starts going, it's your hunt, man. We can go wherever you want. And so we get back to camp. We do dinner and all that kind of stuff. And we're laying in bed. And I kind of wish I had done this differently. Like, in hindsight, one of my issues is that I probably don't communicate my frustrations soon enough with people. Like, if something's bugging me, I just think this is my issue to deal with until I get to the point where I can't deal with it anymore. And then I typically lose my temper. And then I'm like, why did I do that? That was not, the mature way to handle this situation. I should have just clearly communicated, what was working for me and what wasn't. But that's sometimes harder to do than say. So, we're laying there in bed and I'm just trying to get it out of him. Like, what do you want to do tomorrow? And like, the more he's talking, the more I'm thinking, I don't think this guy knows what's going on back here. And so I finally kind of expressed my frustrations. I won't go into details, but I basically came out and said, I don't think you know what's going on. I think you've oversold your horse experience. I think you've oversold your elk hunting experience in this area. I don't want to talk overly negative, but essentially I lost my temper and I said a bunch of like pretty negative things to this guy that, if I was to do it over again, I would hope I wouldn't do, because regardless of the situation, people don't deserve to be talked to in a certain way. And he didn't deserve to be talked to like that by me, but it was a result of just day after day of this like continuing frustration. And we got into it pretty good. We had like a good 30-minute, pretty heated argument. And it's pretty awkward in a teepee in the middle of the night. It's like trying to go to bed with your wife after a fight. Like, you could just cut the tension with a knife. I got out of the teepee at one time to just blow off some steam. And then I came back in to kind of just reconcile and save what I could of the hunt. And we kind of got to a place by the end of it that it was like, okay, listen, we're different people. I like to hunt one way. He likes to hunt another. He's one personality type. I'm another personality type. It is what it is. We're probably never going to be best friends, but at least we can be adults. So we go to bed. Wake up and it's pissing rain. And he goes, I'm not going out today. And I was like, okay, that's your right. And so I kind of got up, made my coffee, hung out outside for, whatever, couple hours. And then while I was outside, I was thinking to myself, I think I need to cut my losses. At this point, I had budgeted 4 more days. And I felt like my hunt was being held hostage. Like, I was feeling very claustrophobic. Because it was illegal for me to hunt solo, I couldn't hunt by myself. Again, this guy's not a bad guy, but I was like, I don't feel confident. I don't trust this guy to go chase elk with me. Like, we're not on the same playbook. It's different when you hunt elk with somebody you have a connection with. You kind of have this vibe and when he needs to move forward and when you need to move forward. And you kind of need that symbiotic connection. Like, it's a group activity when you're hunting elk with multiple people. And we just didn't have that. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just a fact. We just did not have that connection. So I decide while he's sleeping, I think we just need to pull out. There was really bad weather slated for the next 3 days. We had a break for the afternoon of that day. I was thinking to myself, let's just pack up and get out of here. It's going to be a long ass day, but at least if we get to the trailhead, I can get cell coverage. I can go find some areas that aren't wilderness that I can go hunt solo, and I'll try and save this hunt. So that's kind of the decision that I'd come to. And he wakes up. We start having the conversation. I will give him a ton of credit. He was like, are you sure? Like, we got an elk yesterday. I'm sure we can find elk. Like, he was bringing some good points. And I was kind of coming around. I'm like, Okay, maybe we can save this thing. Then he gets a text, an inReach. And the third horse, his daughter's horse, the outfitter goes, they found your horse. Multiple people have been past it. It's been tied up for the last 3 days at the same location. It is not looking good. I don't have time to bring it into you. I'm cutting him loose next time I see him. I'd get on your horse and start riding now. And so that was kind of like, oh, well, that kind of takes the decision. Like, we can't let a horse die. And the horse is tied up because of us, essentially, and is in that situation because of, us bringing him back here and all that other kind of stuff. And it's his daughter's horse and all the rest of it. So, he was like, all right, well, that kind of takes it out of our hands. And I concurred. I don't begrudge him for that. It was sometimes you just got to make hard decisions. And that was the best decision to make given those circumstances. So it's going to be a ball buster of a day, but we're going to pack everything up and head out. So we pack everything up onto the horse and the two mules and we start going out. I will kind of short circuit this part. It was a 24-mile ride from where camp was back out to the trailhead. The horse ended up being tied up about 3 miles from the trailhead. I want to give us some credit. It was a stressful hunt. We clearly just didn't get along. Again, I don't think he's a bad guy. We just didn't get along. And we held it together for that 24 miles. That was a very challenging day. There was weather, there was terrain, there were horse issues. There was lots of things that could have, went south quick. And we held it together. And good on us. We deserve a little bit of credit for that. So we make it back out of the trailhead. It's 9:00 at night. Took us 9 hours to ride 24 miles. It's just incredibly physically challenging to do on a horse. But by that point, I'd really got my legs under me on the horse, and me and the horse had got to know each other. Like, that was probably one of the coolest parts of the whole trip, was that ride out. And interestingly enough, all of this you would think would turn me off horses hunting. And I want to hunt more with horses now than ever before. There's some really good elk country that's kind of only accessible by horse or jet boat up north. And I'm going to work really hard. I actually want to do some horse training with me and my daughter during this off season so that potentially next year I can go do an elk horseback hunt here in British Columbia. I really loved the connection with the horse. I loved being on the horse. It was just a really cool way to access country. It felt super old school. And yeah, I actually loved it aside from all the BS. So we get back to the trailer at 9:30. It's too late to take the horses back. So we sleep in his trailer that night. We get up the next day, basically run to town, drop everything off, say our goodbyes, and we split up at like noon. I had a couple texts with him since then, but there was no hard feelings. We left with a handshake. It is what it is. I feel pretty safe to say we'll never hunt again. But again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, pardon the pun, but I think it was just a bad matchup. I did what I could to drum up some points, some GPS points, in accessible locations. I did a bit more. I hunted for the rest of the time I had. I had one more close call with an elk at 50 yards, decent bull, literally needed him to take 2 more steps, and we would be talking about a successful elk hunt right now. I was sub 50 yards for 10 minutes, and then I felt that wind on the back of my neck, man, and then he just bolted, and that was on the second last day. And that was my Wyoming horseback elk hunt. And I'm finding it's funny, I slip into moments of like real deep depression and anger because it took 6 years to draw the tag, because I'd been so confident that if we got back there on a horse, not only was I going to kill a bull, I was going to kill a great bull. I really felt, and I'll be honest with you, I felt coming into this season like I had my shit together. I had good hunts lined up. I've done 3 hunts in a row. I've failed to kill an animal on all 3 hunts. It's like My ego is taking a shit kicking this year, and I'm eating multiple slices of humble pie. And it's just the way it goes, man. And I have some thoughts about that, but I vacillate between that anger and the depression, and then also this like weird sense of peace about it. Like, I'm lucky enough now where, I mean, man, I leave in 2 days to go guide moose for 18 days. The nice thing about having the schedule I do now is that no matter how bad a hunt is, you're only going home for a week or two and there's another one. It starts to put it in perspective. Like, these are just hunts. No one died. No one got seriously hurt. All of the horses made it out. And I need a point of clarification. The horse had been tied up at 3 miles from the trailhead, but on the way out, we ran into somebody who said Fish and Game had picked him up. It was either Fish and Game or Forest Service had picked him up and taken him out on a pack string earlier that day. And so we only had to ride the 3 animals all the way out. He went to Fish and Game the following day to their corral and picked up that horse. But he did touch base with me. Horse is perfectly fine. So, listen, it is what it is. I want to start with the lessons from this specific hunt, and then I'm going to branch out to the overarching lessons from the season so far. So number 1, don't do high-risk hunts with unknown people when you can't back out. Jeff Bezos has this model for decision-making that he uses called two-way doors and one-way doors. Some decisions are two-way doors, meaning you can make the decision and you can walk through the door. And if what you find on the other side of the door tends to be negative, you can turn around and go back through the door and make a different decision. Those are decisions you should make quickly and execute on, because you can always just reverse your decision and make another decision. Then there's one-way doors. One-way doors, you cannot turn around and come back out. So once you make a decision, you're permanently locking in a particular course of action. Those decisions need to be deeply deliberated upon. I treated this hunt like a two-way door when it was a one-way door. If you're going on like a weekend muley hunt with somebody you've never met before, who cares? It sucks. Drive home. Even if you're going on a hike-in hunt with somebody, who cares? You don't get along? Go your separate ways. You're both competent in the mountains. Go do 2 solo hunts. My issue was I stacked up elements of risk. Going to wilderness where I could not hunt alone. Taking horses so far in that I could not reasonably get out. I could get out on foot, but it was also like abandoning him, and I didn't know if he had the ability to get all the horses out. And so I stacked up all these variables against me that basically made the hunt irreversible. And then I went on that hunt with an unknown variable, being a person I'd never met before. And I had ways to fix this. I think if we'd have FaceTimed a few times, I think we might have got the vibe that maybe we're not the same type of people. I think if we'd met halfway to go on a big hike, the fact that he lived in Wyoming and I lived in BC obviously makes some complications. I think looking for people that knew him, that he'd hunted with before. Normally when this type of stuff happens, I have mutual connections. Like somebody will reach out and say, hey, let's do something. And you go look through their follower list or you see mutual connections and you reach out and you're like, hey, what's this guy like? And you're like, oh, he's a great guy. You'll love him. Or, I don't know, man. I had this thing. It wasn't so great. The fact that I didn't have any mutual connections that knew both of us, the fact that we couldn't meet up beforehand, in hindsight, the mistake was agreeing to do the hunt at all. I should have said, I'd love to think about doing something like that in the future, but I think we need to do like, a less risky hunt first. Like maybe I need to come down for a weekend cow elk hunt or something like that so we can just get to know each other first. So there's lesson 1. Don't confuse two-way doors with one-way doors. And if you're going to go on an incredibly risky hunt, do not do it without knowing that person deeply. Okay. Overarching lessons. I had too many hunts this year and didn't focus enough or didn't prioritize any one of them enough. So essentially, I'd already told my buddy Ken I wanted to go elk hunting with him when I drew this tag. And then when we applied in BC, Ken told me to apply for a moose tag up at his cabin. And the only way I could combine, and then I drew the tag, and so did Ken. And the only way I could combine the moose tag with the elk hunt was to shorten both hunts. So instead of going to Wyoming for 10 or 12 days, the eventual plan ended up, I was going to go have 6 hunting days in British Columbia and then 7 hunting days in Wyoming and account for the travel between. The mistake was I should have said, listen, it took me 6 years to draw Wyoming. Wyoming is the priority. I'm going to take 14 days to go hunt Wyoming, 2 travel days, 12 hunt days. I know this. I know this to my core because one of the biggest things that has contributed to my having more success over the last couple of years is dedicating more time to hunts. Also, it takes the pressure off. When you show up to a hunt, you've only got 5, 6, 7 days. You already have a pit in your stomach. When you show up and you got 12 days, totally different sensation. Much more relaxing. You can know the territory. You can find the game. You can just it's how you're supposed to hunt. A buddy of mine once said to me, look at how long outfitters do a hunt in an area, and that will give you an idea of how long you should think about booking a hunt in order to be successful. And they book 10, 11-day hunts. So that's probably how much, and they're professionals. So if they need that much time, you probably need that much time. The other thing was, I appreciate Ken inviting me to his family's cabin. I had a blast. I got to know his dad, his brother. Overall, I had a really good time there. However, September is for elk for me. And it was cool to chase moose for a few days, but trying to hunt moose the first 2 weeks of September is just an uphill battle. So again, I should have just stuck to my guns and focused on elk for September. So I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday, and prioritization is not an activity of deciding what's important. Prioritization is an activity of excluding what's not. Because I told myself the moose is important, BC elk is important, and Wyoming elk is important. And the other thing, Ken ended up having to go back to work 3 days into the hunt. So then it was do I stay here? Do I go somewhere else? It was just a bunch of variables that were out of my control kind of turned a bunch of my hunts this year into a shit show. It's so funny. I'm working on including more people into my hunts, but almost every time, historically, I like hunting by myself because then if something goes wrong, it's my fault. And if I make a decision and it doesn't pan out, I'll wear it. It's very frustrating to find people who gel with you. I think that's why finding Vance is such a gold mine. Yeah, he had to go home halfway through that goat hunt, but we've talked a lot about that. I understand why he went home. He understands why he went home. He is of the opinion that he would not go home in a similar situation again a second time. He kind of sees he's getting more used to those types of hunts. But that's a guy I feel a deep connection with. I trust him. I can rely on him. He does what he says he's going to do. He deeply cares about my success. I deeply care about his success. When it turned out I had some time, I could have stayed and chased elk for 2 more days in BC, or I was driving right past Vance's house. I texted him. I'm like, hey man, you want to go chase elk for 2 days? And he'd be 100%, dude, get down here. Sleep on my couch. I got spots. Let's go. That to me is the win of the year. Vance is somebody I want to hunt with for the rest of my life. And if you got to hunt with a whole bunch of people until you find those people, maybe that's the takeaway. But back to prioritization, I failed to exclude. What I had to do was cut something away so that I had enough time to prioritize what was really important. And that's what I failed to do this season. Still not enough scouting. I was listening to Brady Miller on a podcast the other day, and even my buddy Steve Evans. So both these guys drew decent mule deer tags this year. Both these guys in August didn't go do an August hunt. They went and scouted for their mule deer, and they literally found actual single deer that were that's the one I want to come back and chase. Now, whether they got that single deer when they went back isn't the point. But when you have a hunt that is so important to you, going on a scouting mission into that unit, 4 to 6 weeks beforehand is a better use of my time than doing another hunt. So I'm not saying I should have canceled my goat hunt, but maybe realistically, if I wanted, in hindsight, I probably should have went to Wyoming for 4 days in August. Would have given me a chance to get to know this guy. We could have went on a trail ride into the unit. We could have turned up some bulls. It would have solved a lot of problems. I wouldn't have got my goat hunt in. But again, prioritization is an activity of exclusion. What am I going to cut out to allow room for what is truly important? So I think I got off on the right foot with scouting this year. But again, I think things came up and I didn't execute it enough. So one of the things that I'm focusing on going into next year is doubling and tripling my scouting efforts so that it's not just like finding general area, it's finding actual animals. Like that's a deer I want to kill. That's an elk I want to kill. From a more philosophical perspective, I focus too much on outcomes and not enough on the behaviors to achieve them. I did this podcast with Adam Yonke a while ago about goal setting. And a more successful way to set goals is by describing the behaviors you need to execute in order to achieve your goals. Because if you focus on those behaviors, the outcomes will take care of themselves. But if you focus on the outcomes, you're likely never able to achieve them. Think about getting $1 million. An outcome would be like, I'm gonna win $1 million, or I'm gonna have $1 million. And you just daydream all day about having $1 million, but you don't actually change any of the behaviors that you have in order to achieve that $1 million. But a behavior would be like, I'm gonna work 10 hours of overtime every single week, all year. At the end of the year, as long as you just focus on that behavior every single week, you will eventually achieve your outcome. Like if you focus on the behaviors, the outcomes take care of themselves. If you focus on the outcomes, you just end up daydreaming all the time and not getting anywhere. And I think coming into this year, I was so confident in so many of my hunts that I was just visualizing all the success. And I wasn't actually visualizing the work that it was taking to achieve that success. Now, the next three and the final three, I'm going to read all together and then I'm going to dive into them. They have more about my journey with Mindful Hunter than anything else. So I forgot my competitive advantage and I forgot about creating my own category. Hunting is a vehicle for learning about yourself. And I don't want an easy life. If I did, I would have stayed a general manager of an engineering firm. So let's start with the first one. I forgot about my competitive advantage and I forgot about creating my own category. I did an MBA. I learned a bunch in that MBA. There's probably 6 or 7 nuggets that 8 years later are still stuck in my brain. And one of them is that the first rule of business is that you do not compete. Competition is a race to the bottom. You just end up lowering prices, increasing, product selection, increasing inventory and turnover costs. The idea with business is to create your own category where no one else exists to compete with. And I truly believe that in a way, that was my goal with Mindful Hunter. I'm not Lampers. I'm not Remy Warren. I'm not even Steve Rinella. I'm Jay Nichol. And I have a way of approaching hunting and thinking about it and talking about it. And I have a desire to go on extremely physically challenging and mentally challenging hunts. And I don't have record-breaking success rates. Although over the last 2 years, I'm 50% successful on all my hunts, which I beat myself up. But when I actually look around, that's actually an incredibly high success rate. So I'm more successful than I give myself credit for. But my brand is not about stacking bodies. Mindful Hunter is not about stacking bodies. A lot of those other guys are, and that's good because that's what they're good at. That's their brand. That's their category. My category is like thoughtful introspection and personal growth through challenge. And using that second point, hunting as a vehicle to learn about yourself. And then the whole don't want an easy life thing, it's like Listen, if I just wanted to stack bodies, I could just go on guided hunts and the likelihood of that would increase greatly. But I like the challenge. And a lot of the anxiety that I've been feeling this year has come from me falsely assuming I'm competing with people that I'm not. And so as I hit the rest of my season, I'm going to back up. I'm going to remind myself who I am. I'm Jay. I make content under Mindful Hunter. My goal is to help people get to know themselves better and to grow as human beings by spending more time in the backcountry and by completing things that they did not think they were capable of. And if by creating content and conversing with people and spending time with people, I can get more people to do that, then I win. That's it. And I can do that. Like, I'm great at that. I love doing it. It's very rewarding. I'm building a career out of it. And when I think about it that way, I have zero anxiety because I think this is what I was born to do. And I think when I'm in my zone doing what I was born to do, I know I'm world class. And that's the attitude that I'm approaching the rest of the season with. So listen, man, it's been a kick in the nuts. It has been a hard season, but I am impossibly more dedicated to Mindful Hunter and my hunts and my career now as I have ever been before. I'm the burn the boats kind of guy. I do not have a plan B. Mindful Hunter either works or my life explodes, and I will die before I allow myself to fail at this. And I couldn't be more excited for the future. I got 18 days guiding moose with Lander. I leave on Saturday for that. I come home for 10 days, and then I got 10 days guiding deer in Alberta, also with Lander, but that's the outfit that I bought. So I'm going to be in my own territory for the first time, guiding my own client. I've been in that area before. I do that for 10 days. Then I come home for Halloween. And then I got November and December to figure it out. Maybe I just do day hunts from home. Maybe I try and squeeze in one more kind of backcountry hunt. I don't know. And at this point, I don't really care. My wife has been so supportive with allowing me to travel and hunt that it'll be a conversation with her about what we feel the right decision is. But that's the season so far. That's what I've been able to take away from it. I hope you guys can take something away from this by listening to it. I'd love your feedback. I mean, you want to roast me for making some bad decisions? Please have at it. If you've been in similar situations and you made different decisions, or you want to give me some feedback on some of it, I'd love to hear that too. Jay@mindfulhunter.com, mindful_hunter on Instagram, and Mindful Hunter on YouTube. Please engage in any of those methods. I'd greatly appreciate it. And a reminder, Mindful Hunter Outfitting is live. Archery mule deer hunts in Alberta, any weapon spring black bear hunts in British Columbia. I would love to help you build your next Canadian hunting adventure. This is not your standard guiding. This is going to be very in-depth. And giving away the Prime RV X34. Anybody who joins or is a member at Mindful Reviews between September 1st and December 15th, 2024 is automatically entered to win. Thank you all for your attention. And as always, thank you for tuning in. If you could engage with this content in any way, shape, or form, like, comment, share, subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. And as always, thank you for tuning in.